This video is brought to you by the lovely people at playtribune.com. Shall we play a game? I wasn't entirely sure what to say about Supreme Ruler Cold War. The people who enjoy and can easily get into a game of this depth have probably already got it, and those that don't care, well. I eventually decided that you should have my opinion on it anyway. Here's an interesting fact. George Orwell used the term Cold War for the first time in his essay You and the Atomic Bomb, published October 19th, 1945 in the British newspaper Tribune. Now I am here in this particular Tribune telling you Supreme Ruler Cold War is a grand strategy game that is exactly as it sounds, and it left me cold. There is a campaign which contains the main USSR versus America stage. The sandbox mode lets you play as any post-World War II country, and the scenarios option has you playing out short objectives such as capturing Busan in the Korean War. Beginners might want to stick to the scenarios for a bit to mess around because it's an awful big world out there and I got very lost. There is also a multiplayer mode, but I didn't manage to play any games because none of them showed up. If you have friends close by, there is also a LAN mode. I would take time to explain the mechanics to you, but I don't fully understand them. There are controls for politics, construction, both civil and military, subterfuge, and military prioritization of certain areas. That last one I found quite late in the game, as I was using the usual RTS style of ordering the units around first hand. The game seems to allocate regions you want to invade with a certain amount of your forces and sends them there itself. There is also a list of resources like coal, tradable goods, and electricity, which are used to make money and other resources. The game looks good because it uses map hexes, but not as well as Civilization 5. The use of unit stacking made this feature redundant. I gave the game millions, especially if you count the amount I was in debt. Literally millions of chances and excuses to call me out, to tell me that I'm an idiot and to take the mouse away from me. That never happened. This is what did. I started off my first game by giving a few orders to my cabinet ministers, and subsequently seeing my economy dive bomb. This was the first indication that either the AI or myself weren't as intelligent as we seemed. I scrolled through the multitude of menus and options. I then came across the Strategic Targeting Pool button. This one is placed next to the DEFCON indicator and had a mushroom cloud on it. I had high hopes. The big red button in this menu was quickly clicked and the sirens sounded. I was promptly nuked into the ground a few seconds later by a swathe of American bombers. Two questions arose. How did they get there so fast? And why haven't I lost? No, you failed pop-up had appeared. Confused, I selected the entire military of the USSR and told them to move across Germany and see how much of France I could conquer. My units all formed a line as I declared war. When they reached the border, there was no real attack order that I gave. The battle just sort of happened in front of me. This put me into a stalemate just outside of Luxembourg, which I watched for a while before looking for orders to give. Nothing I did seemed to give me an advantage or change the way the little explosions happened on screen. I realised this never happened, and yet the supposedly realistic simulation was showing me that all the military assets of the USSR were battling a small group of French tanks, and losing. I admit that this was probably my fault. Some of my later games went better, but I never won. Now, let me explain my opening statements. Consequences build a story around your actions, and I didn't see any that made me feel I was playing a game. The computer seems to do most of the heavy lifting by organising troops and internal politics for you. There is no weight in what is really going on. All the factions have the same feel, which means the political ideologies that define the two opposing powers are reduced to numbers. These numbers aren't even the most useful, and the sheer multitude of them blurs the connection between where you put that social spending slider and what happens afterwards. Fortunately, there is Montagues and Capulets by Prokofiev in the background when you play as the USSR. It gives a little bit of character, but when there is a battle anywhere in the world, it is spoiled by gunfire. Maybe there is a fault with letting people play out a historical scenario as they see fit. This was a highly influential period in geopolitical and militaristic history. Giving people the opportunity to play as both sides seems reasonable, but is changing the events leading up to the Cuban Missile Crisis, for example, a good idea? Without events like this, you don't learn anything about the time period you're playing in, so not having them takes all meaning from the time you're setting your game in. If you did, this would at least give some guidance through the campaign, and something to set your sights on. I won't say I know how this would work, but it's just a thought. The important conflicts do appear in the game, but it's your option not to involve yourself in them that I take issue with. I concede that this game is made for a demographic that has a vast understanding of the Cold War already. The 45 to 50-year-old market is what BattleGoat Studios and Pandemic were aiming for. The complexity is there for those that enjoy it, but I find it interesting that if people want to manage all the minutiae of an empire, why is there an AI to do most of it for you? Anyone that wants to get into this game without the know-how will need a longer acclimatization period than I gave it. The video tutorials are too little too late. I've seen people say that this game is from the good old days, when games were hard and you had to wrestle a bear to get to the game store, but the good old days weren't like this. Those people are mixing up depth with complexity. If you want a less complicated game, try Total War or even Space Empires. If you want a tense and involving Cold War game, try DEFCON. The best games are the ones that make complicated things simple and intuitive. This isn't one of them. So the question is, wouldn't you prefer a good game of chess?
This is not a drill. This is not